Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to all of you who have chosen to attend the special panel on the last day of the annual meeting instead of going to the beach. Yeah, thank you for coming. Yeah, my name is Su-Kyung Kang, Chair of PICES Science Board. I'm going to chairing the first session of this special panel. As you know, PICES was established in 1992 to promote and coordinate marine research in the North Pacific. PICES commissioned an external review to ensure that is evolving in line with the global marine science priorities and to get an input on what changes could be made to make PICES more relevant. As it has been over 30 years since most of our infrastructure was put in place. So now we have the review. The review report was released to the PICES community last month. So it's up to us. So this is the agenda for today. So we have invited a great sets of speakers for this session, so which I would like to invite in shortly. So I would like to invite our first speaker, Aline Hoffman, who is a chair of the review panel and also professor at the ODU. Yeah, please. Yeah, please welcome her with applause. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Well, first off, thank you for the introduction, and also thank you for the opportunity to present the recommendations from the PICES External Review Report. So the members of the review committee are shown on this slide. Two of the members, I think Fang Li and Sin Jae, are here at the annual meeting. David Checkley and Joran Schmidt were unable to attend, so they do send their regrets. So what I'm going to talk about here to start with is why an external review now? All right, well, as we just heard, PICES has been in existence for 30 plus years, and in that time, it has functioned as an effective voice for marine science in the North Pacific, and it's also provided events like this, which are safe and welcoming venues for the open exchange of ideas and information. But as we just heard, things have changed, particularly the focus on accelerated climate change, increased uses of ocean resources, and other issues affecting the PICES member states have made it now so that the focus has shifted to looking at solution-based science that can support actionable information. All right, so the discussions within PICES suggested that it's now appropriate to consider a revision and evolution of the PICES objectives so that PICES can continue its key leadership position by leading transformative science and providing actionable information, which is shown at the top of this slide here, that's relevant to the needs of its member states in the coming decades. So the Governing Council requested this external review to look at what PICES has accomplished in the past 30 or so years, and also to look to the future and look at the changing role that PICES can and should have in the North Pacific marine science. So shown on this slide here, the request to the External Review Committee through the terms of reference was to review and evaluate PICES organizational structure, the secretariat, provisioning of knowledge and informational advice to the member states, cooperation with internal or other external and international organizations, and also PICES capacity development. The External Review Committee was asked to External Review Committee was asked to look at how the science and data advice to other organizations might be done and how this might be accomplished, and also to look primarily at the main obstacles to PICES remaining as a leading marine science organization for the North Pacific. All right, so how was the review conducted? Well, first off, the External Review Committee interviewed many members of the PICES community. These members were represented a diversity of disciplines, a range of career stages, and different level of engagement with PICES. All right, so many of these interviews were conducted last year at the PICES annual meeting in Seattle. And then we also visited the Secretariat early this year, where we had the opportunity to talk to the Secretariat personnel, present personnel, as well as some of the past personnel. And then we did follow-up discussions with many, many individuals. So the review recommendations now are a synthesis of inputs from these interviews, discussions, and observations. All right, so I'm going to start here with a summary of the recommendations in the report, which is shown on this slide here. So synthesis of all the information we gathered identified 5 high priority areas, which are shown in the figure here. All right, and these were considered to be priority areas that are essential to the future of PICES. So a common theme that emerged from all of this information was that for PICES to become essential, and it will need to have a focus on providing science-based information that can be used to support actionable information, actionable advice, required a change in the role of PICES. All right, and that's what's shown at the center of this slide here. All right, because that was considered to be the primary change or the primary area where change was needed. But this changing role of PICES is supported by the other 4 priority areas. And these deal with the organizational structure of PICES, the integrated scientific programs, administration of how PICES works, and capacity development. So the importance of the changing role of PICES is illustrated, as I said, by it being at the center of this diagram with the other 4 priority areas supporting this changed role. All right, so I'm going to now look at the different recommendations. So the role of PICES is the first one I'm going to talk about here. And I'll point out that on this slide and the subsequent slides for the recommendations, the primary recommendation is at the top of the slide, and below that are other recommendations that are needed to implement or move forward with the primary recommendation. All right, so if we look here, what is the changed role that's envisioned for PICES? Well, it is a role that will provide actionable scientific information that is relevant to the member states and that will facilitate actions towards solution-based science. All right, so the related recommendation shown below there that will be needed to do this changing role is first off is to revise the PICES strategic plan to support the transition to solution-based actionable information. All right, so how to do this? Well, the middle recommendation here is that actionable information could be achieved by changing the focus or having a focus on projections, state assessment, and predictions in support of solution-related science or solution-based science. And this would provide an essential source of actionable information on the North Pacific that is policy relevant, perhaps, for the member states. All right, and this would allow them to support actionable information or advice from that. Related to this is our data needs. And I'll go back here with the middle actionable information here. There is a related recommendation to redesign the North Pacific Ecosystem Status Report so that it can support actionable information. So because of that, the third one here is related to the need to, data are needed to support the North Pacific Ecosystem Status Report. So the other recommendation here is that PICES provide a data portal that can provide access to data for the North Pacific that is quality controlled. It's not that PICES should become a database or support a data archive or whatever, but to provide access to data. And the External Review Committee recognized that this is going to require resources for PICES, and I'll come back to this in a later slide. Okay, in terms of the organizational structure, it's recognized that the organization and structure of PICES has served the organization well for 30 plus years. But a finding that emerged from the interviews was that the current structure no longer reflects the needs of the organization, nor does it adequately represent emerging science themes. And so this was a theme that came through from lots and lots of the discussions. So the conclusion here was that the organizational structure of PICES requires changes to align with the revised role. And this leads to the recommendation here shown at the top that PICES evaluate and revise its current structure to align with its revised role that's focused on solution-based science and actual information. So to support a revised organizational structure, the three recommendations below here are shown. And the first of this is to revise the committee and expert group structure that's within PICES. The interviews related to this is that the interviews highlighted that communication across PICES is not always effective. So along with the revised organization, the recommendation is that a simple and efficient communication process be implemented to facilitate coordination and understanding of PICES. And a related recommendation is to develop procedures that will allow efficient and coordinated intersessional work. Okay, so the recommendation here is to change the organizational structure. So the External Review Committee felt like that we should provide perhaps an example of what might be meant by this. And I'll stress, this is only an example. It's not a recommendation. So it's shown here on the schematic in this slide of a potentially revised organizational structure that's based on fewer committees and committees that represent emerging science themes. The integrated scientific program, which I'll come to in a subsequent slide, sits between the science board and the committees and is a mechanism to integrate across and within the committee structure. And as I said, this is a schematic only as an example, and whatever organizational structure is developed will have to come from discussions within the PICES community. All right, so let's talk about the integrated scientific program for a moment here. So everyone we talked to indicated that, pretty much everyone, that the integrated scientific program has values in terms of connecting and integrating PICES activities. But the interview responses suggested that the past and ongoing integrative science programs operate somewhat isolated from PICES. The outputs and the products from these programs do not necessarily meet the needs of the member states, and that future is in the last phases of its futures in its last phase. Is in its last phase. So the recommendation is that PICES. Okay. You go the right way here. Okay, all right. So the recommendation was that PICES use its revised committee structure to develop an integrative science program that will facilitate and produce products relevant to the interests of its member states. So how do you go about starting this process of developing a new integrative scientific program? Well, the first recommendation here is to phase out future and initiate a process to gather and assess the needs and outcomes that support the development of a new integrative science program. Okay, so along with this is to develop a recommendation to develop a science plan for the integrated scientific program that has clear science questions, products for transformative actions, and importantly, metrics for measuring success of the program. And the last recommendation here has to do with governance of the integrative scientific program. And the recommendation is that there be a clear governance structure for the integrated science program that is owned by the science board. Okay, so all of this is going to require administrative support. So revising the role of PICES, the organizational structure to support this new role, and a new integrative scientific program requires considerable administrative support. So the recommendation from the external review is for PICES to assess and implement changes to how its administration is done, with emphasis on looking for innovative approaches, including dedicated personnel and resources provided by the PICES member states. All right, so as everybody already knows, much of the administrative burden falls to the Secretariat, and it was recommended that expansion of the Secretariat is critical for PICES to maintain its existing activities and certainly critical for taking on new activities. So looking at the Secretariat, the recommendation here is to think about adding dedicated personnel that are located at other institutions, such as those of the member states, who have specific skills or expertise is one approach to expand the administrative support. So this is somewhat of a distributed model as opposed to the centralized model that's now used for the Secretariat. So these individuals could be engaged for a short time and for a specific activity. It's not replacing the Secretariat, it's expanding the expertise and the resources of the Secretariat. So another approach talked about is, dealt with in the report, is to enhance the PICES intern program so that it is professionally and financially attractive to people. All right, and this recommendation is that the Governing Council and the Finance and Administration Committee explore some innovative approaches and options to increase the support, the expertise, and resources of the Secretariat through things like a viable intern program. Now, the annual meeting where we all are now was viewed as a very important activity for PICES. But it's also an expensive activity for the Secretariat in terms of the time and resources needed to organize and implement it. So it's also expensive for the participants, and the carbon footprint of the meeting limits or prohibits attendance by some, and is starting to cause governments and sponsoring agencies to question funding to come to the meeting. All right, so there was considerable support for shortening the annual meeting and moving and focusing it primarily on science and moving the business activities of PICES into a virtual format. And there's also considerable support for changing deadlines for submitting session proposals and workshop ideas for the annual meeting. And I think this has already been done. All right, so the last recommendation here is related to the focus on timeliness of decision-making for expert group nominations. And it was pointed out by several people that delays in making these nominations are affecting the ability of the expert groups to do work, and it also delays PICES progress. So the recommendation is that the Governing Council members delegate nominations to representatives on the Science Board so that the nominations are not delayed. Okay, so in terms of capacity development, it was recognized that PICES has a long history of supporting capacity development, and especially for the ECOPs and through things like the annual meeting. All right. A revised role and new integrative science program are opportunities to engage with new communities and form new partnerships. So in terms of this, the reviews recommend that PICES initiate an expert group to develop innovative approaches and identify resources to facilitate capacity development across all career stages and increase disciplinary, scientific, and cultural diversity of the organization. All right, so how does this get done? The three recommendations below there are that strategic partnerships were viewed as important because of the focus on actionable information is going to require expanding the footprint of PICES to address large-scale climate variability effects in the North Pacific and in the North Pacific Ocean and ecosystems. This can be done by forming strategic partnerships through groups in the Arctic, working with groups and organizations from the Western Pacific, and looking at forming partnerships in organizations with international waters outside of the PICES domain and within the PICES domain. So the recommendation is that PICES enhance and expand to new strategic partnerships to exchange knowledge and experience needed for science-based actionable information. So that was strategic partnerships are considered critical here. So the other thing is that PICES depends on a strong community, and maintaining and expanding this community and building the community means ensuring participation across all career stages. So this requires recruitment of new individuals, but it requires retaining existing members. All right, and one way to do this is to make the benefits of PICES known and make PICES essential to its members. So the last one here is looking at engagement of policy and decision makers, and this was considered important for PICES in its new role. So an approach for engaging these communities is to initiate some workshops and training courses for the co-design and co-production of products that support science-based information for actionable advice. And the reason for doing this is that you want to have products that are relevant and needed by the end users and the stakeholders, and that only comes through co-design and co-production. All right, so how do you do this? How do you start the process of going through the recommendations and the new role and all the related recommendations here? So the external review deliberately did not give a timeline for this. That needs to come from the PICES community. But what we did here was to think about what might happen here if you look at the role of PICES in the center here, to change that role and implement it through the 4 priorities around the role. How would that happen? All right, so to get the new role, PICES is going to have to go through some changes. So the governing council is the one that decides on the structure and function of PICES. So the governing council will undertake implementation of the required changes, and that will happen only after the PICES community has reached a consensus on the new role for the organization. Right, the change in role will need to be discussed with the PICES community, and the outcomes of the community discussions will then guide which part of the review to accept in the short term or implement in the short term, which parts of the recommendations are for longer term consideration, and which parts are just not going to be accepted. All right, and the implementation of the recommendations will be guided by the governing council, but it will be done by the community and may involve more than one implementation strategy. But it's fair to say that the most effective implementation strategy is going to come from discussions, will be developed rather from discussions from the PICES community. So the focus of the annual meeting on the future of PICES and science for sustainability in 2030 is perhaps a place to start discussions about a new role for PICES and the organizational changes that are needed to support this new role. So the External Review Committee hopes that these discussions will happen and that the recommendations in the report can guide these discussions. So I'll end by thanking the Governing Council on behalf of the External Review Committee for the opportunity to participate in this important process of providing inputs to guide the future of PICES. Thanks also go to the PICES Secretariat, present and past. The people are listed here on this slide for their support and for their willingness to spend considerable time talking with the review committee members. And many, many thanks go to all of you, the PICES community, who generously gave your time for discussions and willingly provided your inputs, insights, and ideas about the current and future state of PICES. So I'll end at this point, and the QR code on here will take you to the report if you haven't read it yet. I hope that you do read the report. For those who are not into QR codes, I put the web link down there. But anyway, I want to thank you for your attention. I'll try to answer any questions you may have about the review and its recommendations. And I hope that the review at least starts discussions about where PICES can go in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Eileen. Now we have time for some questions. Since we have virtual audience, please use microphone when you have questions. Yes, so.
Hello. So I'm Charles Hanna from Canada, and I would like to thank the review committee for the report. And actually, I commissioned a couple of external reviews of the review, and they were very positive.
Well, thank you. I'm glad they were.
That there was one of the more useful versions of this kind of exercise that they had seen in many, many years.
Well,
So
thank you. It was an excellent committee, and thank you for the comment. Yeah.
So any other questions?
Thank you very much. I also enjoyed that external review. It was interesting. But I still keep thinking, I mean, the actionable science, actionable things like, that review paper gave us like a subject. So do actionable, science. But maybe we need to define what is actionable. And then from my main experiences, to do action, we need to be cautious. And then prediction is not something magic, right? So then, on the other hand, action will be made by the stakeholders. Of course, sometimes we're gonna become the stakeholder, but basically scientists in the scientific committee to prepare something, advice, we need to be careful how it's maybe we scientists need to develop the capacity to develop our capacity to provide a digestible information, including a risk or so on, and then put some do the right action. Without that, the science can be very dangerous.
I hope science isn't dangerous, but no, I think the way to perhaps to look at this is that providing the information that can be input to develop solutions for the issues that are facing the marine world at this point. So if you have the science-based solution or a science-based information that can then be brought to bear on finding solutions that then leads into actionable advice. So it's not a one-step process, it's multiple steps. And the place to start on that would be to start looking at what types of products do the end users and stakeholders want to see? What do they need to address the issues facing their own nations, international groups or whatever? And then look at what PICES can bring to that can inform and guide the development of solution-based science to support actionable advice. I don't think PICES is going to give actionable advice, but it could certainly provide the basis from which that can come. Okay.
Oh, no, sorry. I saw, Jackie has questions. Rafael, could you? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, maybe sounds like dangerous made everybody funny, but made it funny. But my point was the science makes somebody's behavior dangerous.
Yeah.
So that's my point. So that's why I was worrying about what we can do. Like you said, solution. If you go to like sorry, but my main experience, I go to the field, developmental country with respect, and then they want to have some solution. But and the government also ask me like what is the solution for this economic trouble or something relating to fisheries. You know, scientists' role maybe not only just providing a solution. We need to be neutral and they say this. Even government say this way, it may be not right.
Yeah.
So that's why it's maybe. I mean, I'm saying the review, your review was very precious. Then now it gave us that such a topic we need to be seriously thinking, not only just finding, hey, this is cool. With our terminology. Instead of that, we need to make the effort or even the science to provide our information right. Thank you.
No, you're exactly right. And I think that's what you just said would be a very good place to start the discussions within PICES on how you do that, how you provide information that can be used to support actionable information, actionable advice. So I don't think what you were talking about is unique to PICES. I think that's true across all of the science now that we're being asked to do solution-based science. And I think we need to figure out how to do that and figure out what is meant by that. And it's relatively new, at least in terms of the organizations I deal with. So I think it's just something that we as a community need to learn and grow and evolve towards. But thank you for your comments.
Yeah, this gonna be a good start, I think. Yeah, Jackie.
Thank you. Thank you, Naoki, for bringing that up. I just want to highlight that actionable science, that topic was certainly the hot point almost of the review.
Mhm.
So I coffee breaks or committee, everyone is discussing that. And I agree that maybe PICES just needs to feel comfortable with their own definition of actionable science, even if we stop using that term and just focus on forecasting, right? Which is a big part. So maybe not so much what we have been doing a lot of, but maybe we focus on providing more. I wanted to switch to the organizational one because sort of institutional comfort zones with committee structure and science board, so how PICES is organized, might be a very difficult one to sort of overcome. So can you, I know that you provided an example, and again, highlighting that that's only an example, not your recommendation of where to go, because that was another hot point of discussion. And I think it speaks to comfort zones. It's very hard to know where your role will be in something completely different, and it's a little bit uncomfortable. Do you have any examples of other international science organizations that have completely, because it is a large, except for at the very top with governing council and FNA, it's a big reorganization. Do you have other examples? How did they overcome that fear of change? How long did it take? Was it a like rip off the Band-Aid, like do it quickly, or was it incremental?
Okay, your point is well taken, and it's an important point because change is difficult, particularly when it pushes you out of your comfort zones. Okay. I can offer one example of an organization that went through a major reorganization, major change, and that's the AGU, American Geophysical Union. All right, and they went through a complete organizational restructuring, all of the committees, all of the governing structure of the organization. That took place around 2010. It took about till 2015 for all of that to work its way through the system and be accepted by the membership. So it's not something that's going to happen between now and next year when you meet again for the annual meeting. It's going to take discussion. It's going to take a lot of back and forth compromising. And again, using the example of the AGU, it took that. It took a lot of discussion and a lot of well, I think compromise was the real thing to how to do it. The example we gave is just an example. All right. And it would be up to the PICES community to figure out what that revised organizational structure should look like, which is what the AGU did. They went to their membership, said, what do you think? This is what we are proposing. The membership goes, no, 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 we don't like that. Then you go back, you redo it. All right. And, but it's going to take a while.
Okay, thank you. Actually, we are behind the schedule, so just a quick question. Is it possible? Yeah. The last,
I was just curious about how the review committee dealt with the less tangible aspects of PICES. And here I'm thinking about the personal relationships that are built by having a relatively small
Mhm.
meeting, but it builds trust so that I can ask for data from Russia or Japan, or for example, the ability to interact between government and non-government scientists, which is really quite a unique aspect in terms of cross-fertilization of ideas. And finally, just being exposed to new methods that different countries are exploring that we can bring home to our own. So how was that dealt with in the review?
Okay, if you, in the review report, there is a section called PICES accomplishments. And part of the accomplishments, there's one of the sections in there is exactly what you just said, is that PICES has built trust. It's built a community that interacts. It supports that community. And that was one of what the review committee looked at as a major accomplishment of the organization. And the other part of that is the strong emphasis on supporting ECOPs within PICES. So I think that is in the report, as well as some other examples of things that PICES has done that look at the international collaborations, the international trust that was needed to make the advances that PICES did do. So I think it is in the report. At least I hope it is, because that was very clearly something that PICES does that came out of the interviews.
thank you. Thank you, Ellen. Yeah. Now, I would like to introduce Erin White. Erin is the primary convener of the workshop 5, which took place last Saturday, and will present the result of workshop 5, which is PICES Knowledge Co-Production Science Policy Interface. Please.
Great, thank you. And good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I just wanted to mention, so I work with the Cal Coffee program and California Sea Grant, and in my role, I'm a boundary spanner or connector. And so a lot of my goal is to bridge disciplines, sectors, and groups across various forms of knowledge or expertise or goals. And so just wanted to set that foundation, because this topic of thinking about knowledge co-production, especially in science to action or use cases, is very near and dear to my heart. So I'm really excited about this. And I also wanted to express extreme gratitude for all of my collaborators here who really helped to co-create the workshop that we ran on Saturday and that I'll be presenting the results of today. And so we're increasingly aware, bombarded over and over by the urgent need for solutions to address the complex challenges that are facing society. And so this process of knowledge co-production that we've been hearing about has gained increasing attention for generating policy relevant, solutions oriented, and socially robust knowledge. And it's consistently discussed as one of the most important strategies for mobilizing knowledge in the context of evidence-informed policy and solutions. And so there are many terms for this process, and you can see them in this tier. I just want to know this is a tier of happiness, not of sadness. But most of them, I think what's really important here is they all have this similar goal of collaboration and collaborative approaches. So you can think of co-production, co-design, co-creation as kind of all being these co-approaches. There's generally this sense of sharing and exchange, and then bringing together diverse forms of knowledge, as well as generating knowledge, action, and solutions. And I kept those separate because I think it is important. I know there's been a lot of discussion around this. I think there are places for these different ways of thinking about what is driving the knowledge. Is it discovery-based? Is it action-based? So that's kind of why those are separate there. And so what is this? What is knowledge co-production for sustainability? In a recent paper that we wrote, we defined it as an interactive participatory process that brings together diverse actors to collectively generate, integrate, and apply knowledge to address these complex sustainability challenges. And there's been this growing recognition of the need for collaborative approaches to knowledge generation and use. And this is internationally, so including within the United Nations, as well as other intergovernmental processes. And then clearly, as Eileen mentioned, increasingly within PICES. And so this workshop idea came when I actually participated on behalf of PICES in a UN workshop aboard this tall ship, the Statsraad Lemkool. And we were really inspired during that workshop by the collaborative environment that a ship brings. You know, you're all in one place together, you're sharing everything, and the diversity of perspectives that were together on this ship, as well as just the camaraderie that developed. And so I was also going to say, it could have also been just, you know, being up at extreme heights in the fresh air. We're not really sure, but regardless, what came out of this was really this question of what does knowledge co-production look like in international organizations, and how could this knowledge be applied to PICES? So this brings us to the workshop that we ran on Saturday, and thanks to all who were there. The idea was basically to look at lessons learned, and we focused on the science policy interface. Knowledge co-production can be much broader with many diverse groups, but that was kind of the angle of this workshop. And so we had three main goals. They were to understand how other international organizations conceptualize the process of working at the science to policy interface, identify effective strategies and approaches for this sort of work, and then evaluate how PICES information and knowledge is currently being used and explore opportunities for expanding that. We had a diversity of participants across countries. We had, I think everyone actually identified as both knowledge producers and users, which I thought was really interesting. And we had a range of career stages and organization types, as you can see listed here. And we had presenters across organizations like EDF, PICES, World Fish, Westpac, and then the RFMOs. And I'll share what we discussed. We did this through a series of invited presentations, panel discussions, group discussions, and then interactive activities. So that's where the rest of this comes from, is a synthesis of that. And so we identified that the journey toward effective co-production may present challenges, and in some cases, it might not always be the exact right approach. So that's an important thing to consider. And so these are some of the main challenges we identified, which include, I think, as expected, the one that came out the most was limited resources. These, I think, especially important here is these processes really take time, as we were just talking about. So that's one important aspect, as well as, of course, funding and capacity and many other facets. That data or knowledge sharing may be limited or hindered by many factors. That sometimes there aren't clear incentives to engage, or that people's goals might be misaligned. And then there might be reluctance to engage, whether that's due to lack of skills or interest or other things. And then the last one is that there might not be venues to bring together different types of people. So these were the challenges, but we then addressed what might be some effective strategies for thinking about this. And we've put this on this wheel of knowledge co-production just to organize all of the ideas that came out of the discussions. And so we discussed the importance of building and maintaining relationships, as we were just discussing how important PICES is for that, which obviously takes time, and ensuring that we have these repeated and sustained interactions to build trust. And trust, we discussed, was important because it can foster openness, transparency, and effective communication. And the workshop and annual meeting, I think, have been really a great step in this initial process. And then we also discussed the importance of having diverse venues and groups to discuss information needs and establish these shared interests, as well as assess the gaps and broaden engagement. And so this was, one of our speakers said, this is kind of a big tent style approach. And then related to this concept, we defined the who, which is really important. So who is our North Pacific community? And it's a broad range of actors interested in, engaged with, and are affected by activities in the North Pacific. And so this can include, I think it's really important here, people that have a stake, so stakeholders, but also those that have a share, right, or interest more broadly. So that's why we've kept this a little bit broader. And then working within and among a diversity of perspectives across career stages, generations, disciplines, regions, and cultures. And so what did this look like? Kind of includes a range of people across science, policy, industry, education, local and traditional knowledge, and boundary spanning organizations. And the next was to really understand the context of engagement and scope the resources and knowledge available to make sure that the process matches what you actually have to do the process with. And the next piece was setting clear goals, roles, and communication strategies to make sure people know what their expectations are for their contributions, and then establishing clear, agreed upon guidelines for the process and how the knowledge will be both produced and used. And then finally, in actually enacting the process, we thought it was important to ensure that there's co-ownership of knowledge through collaboration, that the information is relevant, timely, and can be practically applied, and that the process is adaptable and iterative through mutual learning. So we also then heard, so we wanted to explore, okay, well, where's PICES in the process that we just talked about and related to these strategies? So we heard from the PICES Secretariat and a panel of representatives from various partner organizations that included regional fisheries management organizations, national representatives, and science and funding organizations on where PICES is in this voyage. And the main finding from this was that PICES' influence on decision-making is indirect, and it mainly happens through PICES outputs related to either kind of country and regional level management or commitments to international treaties. And that was something that was identified that could also be bolstered as well. And there was a call for effective community engagement that includes the knowledge users, kind of like during this panel, to basically align the scientific outputs with the needs of resource managers. So these were some of the needs that were identified by our panel of PICES users, and they related to things like climate variability and change, especially in relation to fisheries management, early warning and environmental indicators, emerging fisheries, as well as things like equity, environmental justice, and local and traditional knowledge. And then climate-related displacement was another factor here. And then some of the types of products that were identified as needed were one-pagers with accompanying 2-slide summaries, fact sheets, actionable tools, and data repository links. And obviously here, I think we can continue to dive into more specifics on each of these, but this just kind of gives us a starting point to think about what are some of the topics and outputs that we might want to see from these. So looking forward, we'd really like to build on existing relationships and partnerships and assess gaps, and then establish venues for this cross from knowledge producers and user dialogue, and develop a structured approach to diverse engagement within PICES. And you can see some examples of things people identified as possible ways to do that, as well as enhancing knowledge and capacity sharing within and between PICES and partner organizations. And so with that, I'd like to thank everyone who joined for the workshop and to all of you for this discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Erin. Time for one quick question if you have. Maybe hold your question, for the panel.
Great. Thank you.
So now I would like to invite the next speaker, the Hannah. Hannah is a co-chair of the Future Scientific Steering Committee and will present future symposium outcomes.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. And as been introduced, I am the co-chair of the Future Scientific Steering Committee, along with Stephen Bagret. And I'd like to review our future symposium that was on Monday. Okay, so the Future Symposium was aimed at celebrating what future has brought to PICES and the North Pacific marine science community. From a number of great presentations, we've learned that future has facilitated transdisciplinary science collaborations. It has implemented a social, ecological, environmental systems approach, the SEAS approach, to PICES activities. And future has contributed to expanding human dimensions in PICES activities and has provided assessment of key organizational strengths and gaps. And these accomplishments are summarized in Takemura-san's paper, which was recently submitted. Okay, the SEAS diagram highlights how future has synergized connections between different disciplines and various vectors. Working Group 45, the joint ICES-PICES Working Group on Impacts of Warming on Growth Rates and Fisheries Yield, known as GRAPE or GRAPHI, explores the relationship between the climate systems, various vectors, processes, the marine ecosystem, and the human system. And one of the recent working group on climate extremes, Working Group 49, would be another example of how this SEAS approach has been applied to transdisciplinary studies. In addition, however, it is also used to identify gaps in knowledge production within PICES. So having said that, the Future Symposium was not only for celebration, it was also for assessing the strength and weakness, accomplishment and gaps of the future program. And we believe that this would help pave the path forward for future science. So for that purpose, we had a panel discussion on the progress, challenges, and lessons learned from future with these distinguished panelists. And the Future Symposium was closed with insightful remarks by Dr. Cisco Warner. So we have learned a lot from the symposium. Yes, Future has provided a foundation for transdisciplinary collaboration across PICES. However, we have to admit that some aspects of our science plan was kind of too ambitious and vague. So questions on ecosystem resilience and vulnerability would be very difficult to answer within the life cycle of the future. And some of the difficulties future has experienced may come from a constraint on operation within the existing PICES structure. We feel a bit lack of flexibility sometimes. And the most important thing, we need to aim for a better future of future and better future of PICES science would be a better communication of future activities and or our activities both within and outside of the PICES community. And we would like to hear more thoughts on the future of PICES science program during the upcoming panel discussion. Very looking forward to it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. I think so. We are behind the schedules. Please hold questions for the panel meetings. Yes, so now I would like to invite our last speaker before the break, Enrique Curtius, PICES chair, to hear the next step in the PICES science or PICES future.
Thank you, Soo-kyung. Good morning, everybody. I am not going to say much. I know that we have coffee at 10, and we will. I want to leave the time for that and to reconvene the panel that follows it. I think we started this process when I became chair about 4 years ago. I had a conversation with the executive secretary, with Sonia, about the idea of doing an external review. We presented it to Governing Council at the time in the following meeting, and we actually looked at different ways that we might go about doing this. And some of them included hiring external organizations that are professionals at doing this, but don't necessarily understand the scientific community. And ultimately, after long discussions with Governing Council, we decided that we will try to enlist members of the scientific community, and specifically the ocean scientific community, to help us with this process. And I think that what we got out of this process is widely beyond my expectations. The amount of work, if you have engaged with the committee that they put into this, has been really monumental. And I think that we will emerge as a much better organization from it, regardless of what we decide to do. But just what we are doing right now, which is having these conversations, having the tools to be introspective, to see whether we are satisfying our own expectations of what we want to be, I think that that is invaluable. So I'm extremely grateful to Eileen and the rest of the committee, Sinjay, Fang Li, and Dave and Jörn, who are not here. What follows on from here, from the Governing Council perspective, is that we will, so Science Board will start their meetings this afternoon, and they will go through Saturday, and they will have careful considerations of what's in the report. And Governing Council will start their meetings tomorrow on Saturday. And at the very least, what we owe the committee is a careful response to their recommendations and their suggestions. And as Eileen mentioned, it's not something that's going to happen this weekend. All we are going to do is really accept formally the report and maybe have a discussion on how we are going to respond to the report, and ultimately how we are going to make implement any of the changes that we think are possible. So again, as Eileen has mentioned, it's a process that's going to take time. It's already been, if you want to think about it from the germination of the idea, it's been 3 or 4 years, and it's probably going to be several more years before we emerge with either the same or a transformed organization or an adapted, evolved organization, let's say. So, so that's it. I am heartened by the response, by the conversations that have happened all week and before. I think that that is good for us to hear all the voices that we can. We are trying to capture them, and we please continue. We have already gotten several, I'm looking at you, Charles, and others, extensive letters in response to the review. People are putting a lot of thought into this. And that is very valuable. We got responses from some of our partner organizations on how they view this and what they feel their role could be. So please, please, please continue to talk to us, write to us, make your voices heard. It is important. It is a community effort. we have different constituencies in this community. We have from government representatives, legal affairs people to basic scientists, right? Like me, that have our interest and ideas. So let us know, keep talking. And I very much look forward to see what emerges from this exercise. So thank you. Coffee is outside.
Thank you. Yeah. Coffee is waiting for us. So please be back here by 10:30. So second part of the panel will be moderated by the Dr. Ian Perry. Thank you.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you whom I haven't met yet, my name is Ian Perry. I'm what might be called a late career ocean professional, meaning that I've been involved in PICES since day one, 1992. And it's been a fabulous experience for me and for many of us in the audience. And I just want to note for you that you too now have an exceptional opportunity. It is really, really quite rare in one's scientific career to be involved at the start of something new, at the start of a new, particularly a new international program. Now, of course, PICES isn't a new program, a new organization per se, but we are talking about the opportunity to start with a new science program. So in the 30 plus years of PICES, how many integrating science programs have there been? And Cisco, you don't count. So we've got from 3 from Enrique and 2 from Ryan. Well, my count is 2. The first one was the Climate Change and Carrying Capacity Program, the 4Cs program, which was affiliated with the International GLOBEC program. The second one was the is the Future program. And now we're talking about something new. So, you know, maybe 10, 15 years for program with some changes in between. So this is a really important session. And we had excellent presentations this morning. There have been fantastic discussions over the course of the PICES meeting on what does this external panel review panel report mean for PICES? And as we heard this morning, what about the what? What about the this? What about the that? What about the administration? What about the intangible aspects of PICES? All of those are really important. What this session is not specifically is a review of and a discussion of the external review report. That's an element of what we want to talk about, but we want to be much broader than that. In a way, we want to kind of carry on the discussion that we started on Monday, well, of the Future program, but now broaden it beyond Future to the whole of PICES. And I should also just make a note that this session is being live streamed and recorded. The recording is mostly, I think, for PICES purposes to review the kinds of questions and discussion. But in the aspect of transparency, just so you know, whatever you say, there will be a record of it somewhere. So be careful. So what we heard this morning, and some of the questions have already come up about actionable advice, science-based solutions as some of the key words. And of course, all of us will immediately say, well, solutions to what? The panel that we have in front of us and that will start our discussions will help us with that question, the what. Why and to whom is PICES important? What are we going to do going forward about the kinds of questions we're going to ask? Are we going to remain a bit of a more internationalized ocean sciences program, or are we going to have impact? The review report notes that we already have had considerable impact. How can we carry that forward? And so we've got a distinguished panel of 6 participants. I'm going to go through and briefly introduce each of them. And if you could hold your applause till I've finished introducing them, that way we can carry on through without interruption, so to speak. Of course, they're sitting in a different order than I had written their bios down, so it's going to take me a minute. That was by design, by the way. We didn't want to have a kind of a 3 Pisces people and 3 non-Pisces people, so we don't have that. First, I'll start to my immediate left and proceed to the end. So I'd like to introduce Jo Fodden. She studies cumulative effects of human activities on the seabed, has worked for the UK government on water quality and eutrophication issues. Deputy Secretary of OSPAR, the Commission, which is the Regional Seas Convention for the Northeast Atlantic. And she is currently the head of science for PICES, the Intergovernmental International Council for the Exploration of the Seas. You'd think after 30 plus years, I would know the international alphabet, but I'll get it right eventually. Second beside her is Eric Kingma. Eric has an undergraduate degree in biology, but he has a PhD in international fisheries law and policy. He's worked in fisheries management in Hawaii for over 20 years, including the Western Pacific Regional Fisheries Management Council and the U.S. Coast Guard District 14 Office of Law Enforcement. He serves on several U.S. federal fisheries committees and advisory groups. And he is currently serving as the executive director of the Hawaii Longline Association. So welcome, Eric. Thank you. Third is Sejong Ju. Sejong is the Senior Director of Marine Resources and Environment Division at the Korea Institute of Ocean Science and Technology. He specializes in marine ecology and food web dynamics and environmental studies related to deep sea mining, deep seabed mineral resources. He represents the Republic of Korea on the Governing Council of PICES, and welcome, Sejong. Beside him on his left is Matt Ramsey. Matt is the Senior Director of Conservation International. He works with communities, industry, and government to return abundance to nearshore marine areas. He's a council member of the Western Pacific Regional Fisheries Management Council and has managed marine protected area reserves on Maui. He is currently the fisheries as well as extension agent for NOAA's Western Pacific Islands region. Welcome, Matt. Beside Matt is Hana Matsubara. Hana is a PhD candidate at the University of Tokyo, working with one of my big colleagues, Mitsutaku Makino. Makino-san's waving in the back there, so thank you. Hana researches interactions between sustainable use of coastal fisheries resources and gender equality in coastal communities. Hana has worked in the Solomon Islands to promote community-based coastal resources management. And Hana currently serves as a co-chair of the AP ECOP, the Early Career Ocean Professionals in PICES. And at the very far end, closest to the door, is Stephen Bograd. Stephen is our co-chair of Future. I'm actually not going to try and remember what the Future acronym stands for. Stephen is an oceanographer with NOAA Southwest Fisheries Science Center in Monterey, California, and adjunct faculty at the Department of Ocean Sciences in University of California, Santa Cruz. He is a co-chair of Future and co-chair or member of several other PICES groups. And I might note that Stephen is the recipient of last year's Worcester Award. So now would you please welcome each of our panelists. Thank you. So the way we'd like to run this is that we have prompted or primed our panelists with specific questions. And I'd like for us to give them each a chance to speak to their question and provide any ideas. And we've got about kind of 5 minutes per person or so. Then we'll open it up for general questions. First of all, to the panel for any of the elaborations on any of their comments. And then general questions. So that is when, if you want, you can ask questions broadly speaking, but maybe deriving from the External Review Committee report. And I know I won't have to do this, but I have a lot of questions of myself to prompt you with. although I know with many of you in the audience, who I won't name at the moment, are pretty good at asking questions as it is. So I would like to start with Joe. The idea here is to sort of help us in PICES understand what the needs for information from PICES are from their particular points of view. Joe, may I ask, please, what are the key marine science issues of your organization that PICES could help to address? Thank you.
Is this what? Yes, this is working. So good morning, and thank you very much for the invitation for ICES to join this panel. I will mention that in the plenary audience, we have Alan Haney, who's the General Secretary of ICES, and Dave Reed, who is the Science or SciComm Committee Chair. So if we have specific questions, I might be directing those to my colleagues. It's very lovely to be invited to give you a wish list of all the things that ICES would like you to do. So thank you for that. I'm going to start with something that Eileen said this morning about focusing on global matters in the future, particularly climate change and the increase in pressure on the use of marine resources. So there is a lot of work that PICES is already doing that ICES benefits from, and I'll focus on those because I think we can really strengthen and deepen those areas of work. Climate change is the obvious one. So you have the section on climate change and marine ecosystems, and we have the parallel SICME group in ICES. Also the UN Ocean Decade and the SmartNet programme. And I think those two elements to start with could be really important scientific elements that are carried forward in the transition from future to whatever comes next. Also mentioned this morning was WGRAPHI, the impacts of warming, the warming climate on growth rates and fishery yields. And that was highlighted by Hannah. And the working group on small pelagic fish. So that mentions just 4 things that ICES and PICES are already jointly doing. And I think those can feed in to something else that Eileen said, which is about focusing on projections, state assessment, and predictions for solution-based science. Added to that is the potential for Arctic collaboration and exchange of research, which relates to the AP ARC, the Arctic Ocean and Pacific Gateways. Within that, the inclusion of Indigenous knowledge is something that ICES can really learn a lot about. I understand that AP ARC has Indigenous knowledge systems as part of one of its terms of reference already. And I believe there's intentions for a publication on Indigenous perspectives, which are all things that we would really encourage PICES to do and we can learn from. In a similar vein, ICES can learn a lot about the engagement and inclusion of minority groups, for example, from small island developing states. I'm going to give a shout out to ECOPS and early career scientists in general. Again, something that was highlighted by Eileen this morning. So capacity building, incorporation of the new generations of marine scientists into intergovernmental work, getting that engagement at a very early stage and then retaining it is something I think ECOPS and our early career scientists can really help us, ICES and PICES in general. They can explain what it is they need. So it doesn't have to be top down saying, this is what we need to recruit you and retain you. We can ask them. I would encourage more and more joint meetings between the two groups and potentially joint events or symposia. Establishing a coherent PICES, ICES approach to the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework under the CBD, and related to that, biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. If we can collaborate there, I think that would be enormously mutually beneficial. Interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary science And the integration of socioeconomics and human dimensions is potentially one of those key actionable advice activities. Eileen also mentioned multidisciplinary workshop this morning as a potential example of how we might do that. And bringing in policymakers means we can do that bridging of the science policy interface. And a final mention, if I've got 30 seconds, is cumulative effects analysis. Both PICES and ICES have cumulative effect groups. Do we really know what it means and how we measure it? And that feeds into this aspect that Eileen also talked about an increasingly crowded marine space. I think there's a lot of collaborative work that can be done there as well. So that's my wish list. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. So we'll move on to Matt. I'm sorry, Eric. What are the key marine science issues of your organization that PICES could help to address?
No, thanks. Aloha, everyone. Nice to see you here, and thanks, PICES, for inviting me to be on this panel. As Ian introduced, I represent the Hawaii Longline Association and the Hawaii Longline Fleet, which is 150 vessels operating out of Honolulu Harbor. We are a tuna targeting fishery, premium grade sashimi market, all pretty much ice chilled. So that gives you an idea on the operation. We're not transshipping at sea. We are making 3-week trips anywhere from 100 to 1,500 nautical miles from Honolulu. They're really targeting a sort of premium market. But in that, we are the largest food producer in Hawaii. Island state, surrounded by beautiful ocean resources. And Hawaii's ag sector has been in decline for a number of years, but we produce about 30 million pounds of fish a year with a value of about $120 million, sort of ex-vessel. And we are amongst the United States' most valuable fisheries. Honolulu Harbor is always ranked in the top 10 in port value for fisheries value, not volume, but value. So we're a major fishery in the United States. And, we have a really close relationship, working relationship with the National Marine Fisheries Service, NOAA, the Western Pacific Regional Council, other federal agencies, very little interaction with the state of Hawaii in terms of management. But we're principally targeting highly migratory species. So we are definitely involved in international, policy and the science that informs that policy. Especially with the Western Central Pacific Fisheries Commission, the Inter-American Tropical Tuna Commission. And, we're fishing on shared stocks. So members of this organization have, fisheries that are operating in our neighborhood, fishing on the same stocks. And so it's really important that information is continued to be shared amongst governments. So in terms of what could be useful, we're in the business of producing food. We're also in the business of making money. We're a commercial operation, and efficiency is the key, especially in a fresh fish market. If you're not efficient, you're not going to do well. And so, but at the same time, we are highly dependent on the science that informs the policy. We follow the science. And that informs the regulations. We're amongst the most highly regulated fleet on the planet. And that comes with actually costs. And so the science is really important. We're less concerned with the whys and the hows of the science, but really more concerned on what does it mean? Because that, at the end of the day, kind of, affects the bottom line, right? The new paradigm, I think, is, shifting stocks. Obviously, we have the ability to roam since we're out in the middle of the Central Pacific. We don't have any neighbors that we're restricted from. We have sort of unilaterally placed large marine closures in our domestic waters, which really no other nation has done so to the degree that we are subject to. Most of our fishing efforts on the high seas, about 80%. So really it's about what's happening with shifting stocks and climate change driven impacts, predator-prey relationships, interactions with protected species, and what are other fleets' interactions with protected species that are, same stocks, same populations. So it's really understanding the impacts of not just ourselves, but also kind of the larger North Pacific Ocean ecosystems, right? Maybe I'll stop there and let others talk. Thanks.
Thank you, Eric. Sejong, I got your question. I just need to find it. There we go. What must PICES do to be essential to your country's needs for marine science information?
You asking me most difficult question compared to the others. Well, I think I'm not really representing the Korea government, just view from my experience. Korea has been the change dramatically their economic status from the when PICES start, which is 1992. It's 30 years. Korea has been developed very well, and now the classified and 10 countries, OPEC. That's why the Korea interest is shifting from their basic interest about anything occur right now in their coast area, and then they spend money at the time. But now, what Korea interest is not only just their coastal problem, they are expanding to the open sea. Even also they working with the UN governments, and they invest. Even through my scientist experience, we're not interested about going outside of the sea, outside of the EEG. But now the many part of our study is outside of our coast area, and which is compared with the PICES, they might not just interesting about the regional sea of the Korea. They interesting about the open ocean of the Pacific. That's why sometimes I also wonder why certainly agency ask me to, how about we contribute to making the MPA in the open ocean? And I said, do you really interesting about that? But they said our status change. Should we contribute for the global interest? And I think in that case, sometimes the better way how we communicate, particularly scientists and Korean scientists, communicate with the government office to what their interest is. We, first of all, for my case, I didn't know they are really interested about the MPA. And later they asked me, are you do something like that? And I said, why you certainly change your attitude? Before, you just interested about the harmful algal bloom in certain area and study do that and they invest lots of money. But they say that's our local problem. But now we have to see outside of our nation. And I think that thing is maybe from the scientists, we now ready to ask them to expanding our view too. Not only just the government ask us to do this, and which means I have to change my attitude first. And that perspective, maybe from the future of PICES, we have to consider not any nation just interesting about their coastal water. It could be the more open sea area. When we making the MPGR, the fourth MPGR, which is we don't get a lot of information, any of that, except the coastal area of the west coast, east coast, not the middle of Pacific Ocean. Is we didn't have the much information, which means I don't really thinking any country not interesting about those area in the future. it could be more interesting about the wide range of the different regions. And I don't want to say anymore because I'm not representing Korea government. And it's my view, and I think Korea change, the government change their view of the sea contributing the science and also globally. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sejong. Matt, your question is, what are the key marine science issues of your organization that PICES could help to address?
Okay, first of all, aloha and welcome to our beautiful islands. It's a pleasure to have you here and thank you for coming. I'm gonna sidestep that question and answer it a little bit differently. So I don't know if folks know this when they invited me, but thank you. I'm gonna be brutally honest. And I feel alone in a sense that I'm probably the only person in this room that doesn't have a degree beyond an undergraduate degree. And I'm not a scientist. And because of that, people uniquely introduce me to conversations and management decisions that happen on a local, regional, and global level. So I work locally with the state of Hawaii. I'm involved in fishery discussions about the Pacific, and I'm part of an international organization. So with all of that context, I can say your presentation this morning about the analysis on where you're headed, I was thrilled to hear that the organization is moving in a way that's pursuing actionable science. Love it. Because as somebody who's not a scientist, when scientific presentations are made about X, Y, and Z that I have no interest in, I fall asleep, I won't pay attention, and I won't direct resources to that organization. But as a decision maker, if that organization consulted me first, tried to understand what I need to do, what I need to understand, and where I want to go, I'm going to completely have faith in that organization because we talked ahead of time. So that interaction with management, decision-making authorities, key. You can do all the science in the world, but nobody's going to use it unless you have that connection to the managers and decision makers. So I wanted to make that point briefly. The other kind of point I wanted to make, as a small bunch of islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, we have a very different view on the Pacific. We see the ocean as a connector, not as something that separates all of us, separates all of our countries, separates all of our jurisdiction, but as a connector. So it's a little bit hard. I mean, I understand the reasoning for kind of dividing things between the North and South Pacific. But as islanders, we see it as one contiguous unit that we all have to work together to protect. And the idea of protection, uniquely coming from a conservation organization, doesn't mean marine protected areas. It doesn't mean fisheries management. It means working together to figure out what's the best use of the ocean. And in the Pacific Island way, that means talking. So talking with the managers, talking with the partners, talking with the other countries. I know this is something that you all kind of recognize and you all try to do, but I just wanted to emphasize that as somebody who is not a scientist and somebody who's not PICES, it's really, really important. The other kind of point I wanted to make is I also love the points that the other panelists brought up about working with indigenous peoples, having place-based knowledge, and looking at how things are moving in the Pacific. We are at a point where the world no longer stays within their national jurisdictions, right? Everyone is looking to EEZs or to kind of waters that are jointly managed. So it's important to work with those agencies, those decision-making bodies that really address things beyond national jurisdiction. And I must say, having a science entity that is neutral, that talks with managers across the Pacific and provides science that really addresses those concerns, that is gold. If you want to stand out as an organization who is looked upon, who is well-funded, do that route. It's hard to find those organizations because it's a very hard niche to fill because it's complicated. But if you can do that, that would be an amazing feat. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. That's exactly why we've invited you here. Thank you. Hannah, your question's a little bit different. What must PICES do to be most beneficial to the early career ocean professionals?
Yes, thank you very much. And I am really grateful for that question. And thank you for having an e-group in this important panel. And I really appreciate it. And firstly, I sincerely appreciate to all the support that PICES has been provided to e-groups, including technical and financial support for the activities such as capacity development training, mentorship program, and travel grants, and also for providing this comfortable space for e-group to join the discussion in PICES. And these forms of support have been invaluable until now and will continue to be deeply appreciated in the coming decade. And in addition to that, I would like to propose 2 requests. So the first request is for the deeper engagement of e-groups within PICES. So as presented during the Future Symposium, 40% of the participants for this year's annual meeting are e-groups, which is really great. But still, the level of e-group participation in the related the e-group participation also in other related conferences are very high. But still, the number of e-groups joining expert groups or serving as a co-conveners are a bit limited. So, as one of the priority activity for next year, AP e-group aims to reach out to other expert groups to work more closely to increase that number of e-groups a bit more deeply engaged in the PICES, because such experiences are highly invaluable for e-groups to build our own capacity for research activities and learn how to communicate and work together with other PICES members. For example, this is just an idea, but I understand as at this point, the number of working group members from each country has the limitation, but if you can allow some extra e-group members adding to that members, that would be highly helpful to encourage more e-groups to join the working groups. So that kind of deeper engagement would help e-groups to prepare for future leadership role within PICES. So that's the first point. And the second request is for a platform that would allow e-groups to both deepen their own expertise and to be engaged in interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary research activities. So e-groups, it's same for me, but e-groups are still in the developing their areas of expertise. So the capacity building in our own discipline is still very important for us. So I understand as in the external review report, it's proposed to reform science committee or expert group structure. But even after that reform, having a clear structure showing who can offer guidance in our specific field of study would be very helpful for us. But at the same time, opportunity to participate in interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary research are very important for e-group in line with current trends. So for example, I hope that the annual meeting in near future will offer more sessions, including multiple disciplines, encouraging science exchanges, not only among e-groups, but also with middle career and late career ocean professionals across different fields. So that's the request from e-group perspective. And once again, PICES has already provided significant support for e-groups, and we are truly grateful for that. And we at AP e-group will continue working hard to ensure e-groups can effectively and meaningfully benefit from those support and bringing valuable contribution back to the PICES community. Thank you very much.
Arigatou gozaimasu, Hana-san. Stephen, your question, what must PICES do to be essential to the UN Decade of Ocean Science?
Yes, essential. Okay. Yeah, thanks for the question. I think I've got a few thoughts on that. First and foremost, I think, is for PICES to continue on the path that we've been paving in recent years, to do more of this transdisciplinary science from climate all the way to human dimensions, human communities, and Hannah mentioned this as well. I think that's going to be critical, and I think Future has kind of set the foundation that we can build upon for that. The other part of our decade activities within PICES would be these cross-cutting themes and in particular promotion of ECOPs. So I do want to really call out the advisory panel on ECOPs that Hannah is a co-chair of. They've been tremendously active and made a big impression and impact on PICES. And when we really want that to continue within the Ocean Decade context as well. In fact, PICES was able to send 3 ECOPs to the Ocean Decade Conference in Barcelona in April, where they had very critical roles in some of the events there. So that was a very important contribution from PICES and ICES. And then also just more generally, not only generating knowledge, but sharing our knowledge, sharing our capacity with communities that are beyond what we typically work with and beyond even our convention area. So our decade work is sort of an outward facing aspect of our science. And so that brings us to the SmartNet program, which Joe mentioned at the beginning. So SmartNet is the ICES PICES endorsed Ocean Decade program, and we proposed it and had it endorsed explicitly so that ICES and PICES, 2 leading intergovernmental marine science organizations, can provide a leadership role in the Ocean Decade. So not just participate, but provide leadership. And I think we're very well positioned to do that. We have a long history of collaborations. We have a robust organizational structure. We are really good at hosting meetings in great places like this, a lot of expertise. And so SmartNet is really aiming to leverage that partnership to expand and build upon, build global knowledge networks to really expand that beyond, again, our convention areas. And then I've been talking about SmartNet. I'll also mention briefly Becky, Basin Events to Coastal Impacts, which is another Ocean Decade endorsed project that sits under the PICES umbrella with a more North Pacific emphasis. The next thing I'll mention, I'll bring up the A word, actionable. Okay, so this is the word of the week or word of the decade, whatever it might be. The Ocean Decade philosophy really is about not doing science as usual. It's to be transformative and equitable and inclusive and solution-based. That really is the philosophy of it, and that's what SmartNet is taking on as part of its activities. And here's, I'll quote Dave Reed sitting here in the front. He's our SmartNet co-chair from ICES, and he said something at Aaron's workshop earlier this week. He said, most of the science that we're doing is actionable. It's just not actioned, right? It's not actually necessarily being used as efficiently and optimally as it should. And this workshop that Aaron talked about earlier, I think was a start in trying to break down those barriers. What you were mentioning earlier is absolutely critical to do actionable science. We need to sit down with the stakeholders, the science users, to really co-design the kind of science that we need to do, and that's going to be impactful to society. And then I'll finish with one more point about PICES and ICES leadership in the Ocean Decade, and that's the Global Ocean We Want survey. So this is led by Makino-san, the PICES Human Dimensions Chair, and a number of ICES and PICES representatives, where they're doing surveys in a number of countries. They've already done several, and I think there's several more planned, where they're actually going to the public and asking them, how do you relate to the ocean? How do you use ocean resources? What are your perspectives on the important issues and critical concerns about the ocean? And this gets at the heart of what the Ocean Decade is. So the Ocean Decade, the theme or meme or whatever it is of the Ocean Decade is the science we need for the ocean we want, right? But what is the science we need, right? You could ask 10 people and get 11 different answers. And also, who's we? Who's we, right? And so what this global Ocean We Want survey is actually trying to do is to provide quantitative answers to that ocean decade question. What is the ocean we want? And how do we get there? And this is really, I think, going to guide what ocean decade activities are prioritized in the future, including the work that SmartNet, Becky, and our programs do as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. And thank you all panel members. Those are all excellent opening comments. We have prompted them or provided them with additional questions, which we may get to as we, if there's any kind of a lull. But let me open it up to you. Initial questions from the audience, and I see one right here. And I'm going to, we have a microphone. Thank you. Enrique, please.
Yeah, I'm going to pick up on a thread that at least four of you in my mind brought up. Eric, I think you put it as, what does it mean? You don't care how or why you got there, but what it means. And I think, Sejong, you talked about being able to communicate to your government the science that we do. And I think, Matt, you had something similar. And I think, Stephen, you just ended with that, saying that a lot of what we do could be actionable, it's just not actioned on, right? Which speaks to me to a lack of our ability to communicate or explain what we do, right? And as I see sort of a range from fisheries organizations or fishermen to government to conservation organizations, right? The same science may need to be represented in different ways, right? So I'm just wondering if anybody wants to tackle what that means, right? I mean, what can we do with our science? Do you have an idea or a thought on how, what kind of information you would take and what form should it be in to help you? I know it's a big question, just any thoughts?
Who would like to tangle with that one? Sejong.
I feel like it looks like everybody watching me.
We are.
For my view of the PICES is more science-based organization. But if you look at the other organization like IOC and others are more like a political, even if they do some science. However, the way to communicate the government office, government is more the political based thought, and which means I hope science is above the politics, but science is all the time below the politics. If someone not agree, I'm probably only myself thought that. But in that case, I think PICES has the strongest point, which is all science-based, the organization at the beginning, and currently still same thing, but we face the different issues now because we consider as what the government needs from the PICES, which is we now consider about the politics. But the strong involvement of politics is a problem for science because the direction of science totally change every time politicians change, they following that. However, why I saying that is at the opening announcement, sometimes the scientists have to convince that their officer or politician what we are interested in, which is the beneficial for our government. Not right now. If something is not right now, in the future or globally, it's very key issues. And I think this is also, I can really do well because my brain is all scientific based, which is a logical explanation to them. It is not working. And sometimes I also learn how politically communicate with them. And currently I learn slow by slow because I was working as the government counsel in PICES. Now I saw some other representative how to they react, and I learned, and which is from now I probably when I get back to my nation, I totally explain what happened in the annual meeting, in the council meeting, with my political thought on that they are interesting. And that's the way I will do. And I think still many, even the early careers oceanographic scientists, they should learn those too, because I don't want to be ruined some philosophy of science, but in your way to developing your science, you need to communicate with the politician. And that's I learned few years ago, not long years ago, and I probably reacting from now for Korean scientists. That's my opinion.
Thank you, Sejong. Eric.
Yeah, thanks. The question, I think, incorporating interdisciplinary fields is really important. And I think the National Marine Fisheries Science Center here has been doing that recently, or trying to, because they're researching and doing science on different things. But in the past, I think we've heard, I don't know what, there's 200 people in the building, but they may not even cross paths, and it's important to bring those disciplines together. Because there was a comment earlier about science being dangerous this morning or something. I had a former colleague that would say he knows enough statistics to be dangerous. And there is an element to that, especially in fisheries. There's a lot of advocacy on either way, but there's some science that is pushing an agenda. And we battle that all the time. And there's headlines that are being generated based on the science or the interpretation of that science. And so when you incorporate, I think, some interdisciplinary sort of fields and knowledge bases, you might reduce that potential of just going one way. So I think it's really important to incorporate those things together and think ahead of what potential outcomes your science may lead to. Thanks.
Thank you, Eric. Stephen.
Yeah, Enrique, I think your question really gets at the heart of what we're going to need to be discussing over the next couple of years to respond to the external panel report. I think as a scientist, I want my science to be useful to society. And I think probably every single scientist in PICES has the same viewpoint. We want it to be actionable and to be useful. And the tricky part is, how do we establish these mechanisms to communicate? Because what we need to do, and we need to do that from the very early beginning of when we develop our science. We need to be sitting with the RFMOs, for example, or coastal communities, and saying, okay, this is the scientific capacity we have. What are the needs that you have? Where can we meet in the middle? And so finding venues or opportunities to do that, whether that's trainings, whether it's workshops, whether it's having something that came up, an advisory panel on stakeholder engagement, where we have folks like this as actually part of the PICES organization, something like that to improve that communication, I think is really critical.
Thank you, Stephen. Anything else from the panel? Matt.
A little bit of a different perspective again. I think if you get to the point where, we'll say, multiple sides are arguing over your science, you're in a very good position. And the reason I say that is there's a lot of science that's creative that paints something as black or paints something as white, and people will support it or go against it. If it's painted as gray, and you show everything that's on the field, and managers argue, but they're arguing over the fine details, but they're coming over and agreeing on what's in the middle, your science is in a good place because it's advancing those conversations. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. I just have a follow-up on that before we go to other questions. A couple of you, particularly Eric and Matt, mentioned that you interact with science. How do you interact with science? Do you talk to scientists, or do you get information from the Fishery Council? Where is your interaction with scientists and therefore the PICES?
I read journals every single night before bed. No, I'm sorry.
Well, you're better than most of us.
I don't. I think you hit it. The US system, there's the regional fishery management councils that, it's sort of an open platform for the public. And there's a lot of that intersection where the public can basically have access to fishery science and the policy that's being developed around that science. So I think from a fisheries perspective, that's where we go, is to the council meetings and, the science and statistical committees, as well as the council, the advisory panels. But also, 150 vessels, we have a pretty large platform for cooperative research. We are involved in a number of research projects at all times in our fishery, and we could do a lot more too. So I think it's, hope that answers it. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Matt, do you want to add?
Again, tough, because I'm not a scientist. So a lot of it is very hard to digest and understand. So as part of my, I guess, hat as a international conservation organization, there's a lot of science that our organization produces and partners on. And so I would say on a weekly basis, I get an email with all these publications that are coming out. Move it to the side. Don't read it. Just because there's so much science and so much knowledge that's being produced, number one, that I don't understand, and number two, that I don't have time to pay attention to because it's not my priority at the time. It's great that I can refer to it later on. I will say that. And on the side, on the Western Pacific Fisheries Management Council side of things, when I'm making a decision as a council member, it is integral that I listen to our stakeholders and the Science Center, because they are providing me with the information that I need to base my decision on. And I'm basing that, it's my public duty to make wise decisions and listen to all these different sources of information. So when the council staff goes to the Science Center and works with them and produces information for me to review, that's my way of kind of accepting or understanding that science. And always, I rely on other people to translate it for me, because I know it's amazing science, it's cutting edge, it's complicated, but I have no idea what it says. So staff have to take the time to explain it to me in layman terms, but also if I have questions, hey, exactly does this mean? Then they can kind of transfer that information to me. And the best scientists I know can make that transition. So I understand. So that's kind of where science comes to me, and that's how I use it.
Excellent. Thank you. Open other questions. Aoki-san, excuse me, Aoki-sensei. You'll need a microphone.
Thank you. My question is more like a ECOP. Relating to the actionable science, I was relating to that question also. For me, based on my mere experiences, to provide some effective advice, we need to digest our world and then try to communicate to the people, the managers, and then, so on and so on. Then also scientists need to understand how that the process, not only just a prediction, how that the project from after the first impact, how that the influence after the first impact. For example, so this guy gonna be the beneficiary, this guy gonna be fails, the financing and so on. Those kind of scenario we need to understand then we need to be careful, by the way. Then yesterday I went to the poster session and talking to many young folks. Then young folks was very excited, just like when I was young, and talking about their studies. But I didn't hear so much about how their study gonna relating to that society or how that impact they have no idea. Oh, I don't know. This is gonna be cool, So it's cool because remember when I was young. But I want to ask you, relating to this actionable science approach, what you can do as an ECOP. I mean, like or somebody who gonna lead the ECOP for the future.
Thank you, Naoki-san. Hana-san, please.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. And I've been thinking about the relationship between actionable science and ECOPS actually. And my question, I also have a question that what kind of impression ECOPS received from the world of actionable science? For me, first time I heard the word of actionable science, I felt like I have to do something society want me to do. So for me, the impression of actionable science is more applied science or society-driven science. But I think, so I was wondering how PICES can ensure the space for ECOPS to do both society-driven research or applied science and more curiosity-driven science or fundamental science. So yeah, and because for me, I am a student pursuing my PhD degree and I enjoy science. And this is because PICES mentors has shown me the value and joy of engaging in research, really driven by passion to understand the natural and social world. And however, I'm just concerning that the repeated emphasis on the actionable science might cause ECOPS to lose that free side. So, and I believe that innovation often arises from those free scientific exploration. And these insights may eventually fuel actionable science in powerful ways, I believe. So that's just my personal viewpoint, but I also would like to hear other thoughts from other ECOPs in this video. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Any other comments from the panel on that one? And we'll turn to other ECOPs in the audience. Oh, I'm sorry, Sejong. Thank you.
For me, when I was an early career scientist, I don't really care about the communication with the manager or officer because the enthusiastic to do science is I'm interested about what I do, and which is when you be a manager, that's a learning curve. You understand the system of the how getting funding or how actionable information you provide. I think requesting for the early career scientists, you don't know how we get the funding. You have to learn, which is much difficult for them. And also don't need to be every scientist to communicate with the manager and also politician. That's my philosophy. Some of the people probably interesting among the scientists, be a manager, also be a fundraiser. That person could be the trained and also by interest by himself, which is they develop their learning curve. And I don't expect every early career scientist to understand those mechanisms. And that's my opinion.
Thank you, Sejong. Any other comments from the audience on this topic? I'm sorry, got a hand up. Okay, Chris. Oh, sorry. He's way up at the back. Why don't you stand up and then. Not on.
Really appreciated Hannah's comments and the overall appreciation for early career professionals and PICES. But I wanted to ask Matt and Eric, as representatives of industries and organizations that aren't necessarily filled with scientists, how do you see early career professionals meeting in your industries, meeting early career professionals here? And do you see opportunities to collaborate and open up those conversations earlier in our careers and in our training so that they're just more commonplace for us later on.
Thank you. Matt's going first.
Okay, well, to clarify, pretty much all of the organizations I'm a part of have scientists on staff. So that's a core part of it. But I would also say pretty much across the board, all of the organizations I work with prioritize investing in the next generation of managers, scientists, fishers, whatever. So it's always a priority for any of the organizations I work with to bring on students to expose them to what I would consider the real world. So what happens outside of academia. I think that's extremely important. So just for instance, with my team in Hawaii, we work with 5 or 6 universities every year to bring on students in varying capacities, internships, volunteer kind of things. But that's, I mean, just from my perspective, having a student who has that exposure to real world applications, real world issues, and being able to communicate, that's essential.
Thank you. Eric, did you want to end?
Yeah, thanks for the question. You know, being a fishing association and representing fishermen believe they're scientists. Don't get me wrong. But I think there's the intersection with kind of incorporating, early career professionals that have that science background, working in the fishing industry. One pathway has been observers, working through the federal government. But I think there's other pathways, and it's really showing that interest to be involved in a grind of a business, and that's not for everyone. It's, long days, early hours, smelly conditions. Many of you guys are familiar with fishing, I'm sure, but there's a real need for professionals that can do data analysis, independent of the government. If so, we have access to a lot of data. And if you guys have the opportunity to visit the Honolulu Fish Auction, and there is an incredible amount of data coming through there every single day. And so it's incorporating those from the outside and having that understanding of how to really analyze data and provide it to fishing industry. I think there's a lot of value there. Thanks.
Thank you, Eric. Yes, Leo.
Thanks. I'm not ECOP, but I'm old and slow. It's something that Eric mentioned earlier, made me want to pose a very vague question. And this relates to the dangerous comment, which I totally agree with, by the way. And science communications to the public and what the public absorbs. How do we as scientists strive to advise the ECOPs about avoiding the temptation of the big splash, flashy, siloed efforts that result in lofty publications? And it's always the career goal to have that first authored publication in Nature or Science, but often there's always a bunch of damage control that comes after that because of the way things work. And I just pose that to the scientists. How do we provide the guidance to ECOPs to find that right balance to avoid that situation? Thank you.
Anybody like to take that on? Looks like Stephen's going to.
I don't know that I want to take that on, but I'll try. No, it's a really good point. And this idea of dangerous, I think the issue really is risk, right? And so, we want to provide science that's going to be useful, even if it's published in Nature. We still want it to be useful and used by our stakeholders. But I think there is, depending on how far down that road we go towards actionable science as we get into advice potentially, and where we want to go as an organization, I think we still have to think about. But whatever we do in that regard, and my advice to ECOPs as well would be, yes, do your science, let the stakeholders and end users know about it and communicate it, but also communicate the uncertainty, right? So if you put together a forecast, for example, you can say, okay, it might be wrong. And, we have only this much confidence, in that particular scientific product. And so it's always, I think, this balance of trying to disseminate your science while also articulating, what the risks are.
Thank you, Stephen. Sejong?
Talked too much. I agree what sometimes science put in danger position, and which is the even if you go through the peer review and then published, and sometimes a lot of judgment through the other scientists. However, scientist is challenging, and if you worry about your result will be challenged by others, I enjoy it, and that's why the policymaker, they have their own judgment. It's even if some scientist outcome, they're not going to take everything applicable, and I just let policymaker decide. But whatever I do, I believe my outcome, and which is if a scientist didn't have those kind of philosophy, you may hesitate every time with what you have. And that's why I'm not so worried about some outcome from your scientist, your effort on the science. And it's even if I understand the dangers of some critical outcome, however, they have the more challenging and also let others argues and also involvement be developing further science. And I take those way.
Thank you, Sejong. So we have about 15 minutes left. And I'd like to maybe move on to other questions or open it up, and I'll take a question from Rebecca Ash.
So this is a little bit of a comment, but I guess maybe to pose as a question, we can have people reflect on it. But one of the big themes has been communication between scientists, between different stakeholders, particularly with regard to actionable science. And I'd like to connect it to one of the things that Erin Satherwife was talking about earlier, which is boundary organizations. And I feel like boundary organizations are something that's really important because we can all become better communicators, but that requires a lot of skill development, and some people are more talented than others. And you can get better by going to workshops like this week, but there's professionals who can do this, and this is what they do, and they're incredibly talented at it. And I've worked with people like that. I feel like I've really benefited. I think particularly some of the people at Sea Grant is what comes to my mind. But I'm kind of thinking like a little bit like, what role do we see in terms of working with those boundary organizations to solve some of these communication issues and make science more actionable? I guess maybe the question is PICES in the new direction that it might be going? Could it become a boundary organization? And is that like one of the goals in the new directions, and how to balance that with also being a science organization?
Thank you. Anyone on the panel like to comment? No, you don't have to.
Well, no, I think that's a really good point. And I think if I'm interpreting correctly, boundary organizations, it's those that are working kind of at the interface of different communities to sort of bridge those gaps. And so I don't know if we would necessarily call ourselves a boundary organization specifically, but I think some of our activities, future, and to some extent, I think SmartNet with the Ocean Decade is meant to do that. It's meant to like build these global knowledge networks that kind of bring these different communities together that ordinarily would not be speaking to one another. And so by all means, if there are organizations out there that could contribute to PICES moving in that direction better and having better communications between the science we do in our expert groups And the people who actually can and need to use that science, I think that would be the way to go for sure.
Joe?
Can this might be a bit controversial, picking up on the communicating of our science point. Maybe we're doing it the wrong way round. So we can do the science, whether it's pure science, applied science, and then we have this hang up about how do we communicate this? But picking up on something that both Eric and Matt said about the importance of the interaction with managers and policymakers, maybe we should be going into workshops that might require expert facilitators, but just having open questions and saying, what do you need from us? Without any push of what information we've got. And we might find in dialogue that we have products, papers, reports, documents off the shelf, and they'll say, we need to know about X, a particular species that's causing a harmful bloom and affecting the fish. We might say, aha, we have a report on that, here it is. But we first asked them, what do you need? They're engaged and being ready to receive that information, rather than us saying, how do we communicate the science? Do it the other way around. And then there will be questions that managers and policymakers ask that we do not have answers for. And that's where the co-creation comes in of, okay, what science do we have that we can build on, make it more applied maybe, to answer those specific questions that our managers and policymakers are ready to receive in advance.
Thank you. There was another, we'll take one from Fei Chai.
Thank you. Fei Chai, Professor Emeritus from University of Maine. Currently, I'm working at the Xiamen University. I'm watching how Ian interacted with the panel members and the audience, because next week in Yantai, China, there will be a science symposium among China, Japan, and Korea, 3 countries. And I have been asked to chair a panel discussion for 90 minutes. So I'm learning, I'm watching you how to interact. I think the way we do science is evolving, and that including terminologies and how we work. So when I was a graduate student, is hypothesis driven, right? So what is the scientific questions? What's your hypothesis? How you test them and all that? And then we publish a paper, we move on. And then now I think the society, and from the UN decade mentioned a couple of times, and the demands, the information, the way we do science need to be changed. But it's not a from 1 to 0, all the sudden change, but gradually. So my question to the panel members is, can you think of maybe 1 or 2 successful stories and cases from the science providing the actionable, useful information to the stakeholders, whoever is used, use that information. So, and from that, we can break down to the pieces to summarize what works, what needs to be improved, and then that maybe lead the future design, co-design the knowledge programs much tangible instead of just all theoretical.
Okay, so I'll start. I would say that aspect of work is quite fundamental to what PICES does. It's kind of bread and butter work almost. So we have a big advice department, and they're commissioned to provide specific advice on fishing, but also we have special requests. So it might be from a country or an organization that has a specific question they want us to answer. And there's a whole process that's then gone through in terms of more clearly defining what is that question. So somebody thinks they have a question, and when we dig a little bit deeper, sometimes there's all sorts of uncertainty around what the question is. So it takes quite a while to co-design and define what the actual question is. And then through the whole process of the production of that piece of advice or that request that has been commissioned, the requesters are involved in it, whether they're observers in a workshop or actually taking part in it right through to the final production. And so the intention is that the advice then is actionable at the end because of that whole co-creation process. I don't know if
Thank you.
Alan or Dave want to expand on that.
Good answer. Eric?
Yeah, thanks. Just an example that we've had relative to our fishery recently, I think a product of the Science Center, the Pacific Islands Fishery Science Center, and trying to understand the impact of our fishery on loggerhead and leatherback sea turtles, which, you know, neither of those species nest in US beaches. It's Japan and Indonesia, respectively. And but we interact with a few of them a year, as well as international fleets, but really trying to understand our impact. And they brought together an interdisciplinary team of scientists that modeled the impact, and based on the information they had and relationships these scientists had with colleagues in other countries, and produced a really comprehensive product that the managers then, the council and the National Marine Fisheries Service, were then able to use to not only set regulations, but to appease the Endangered Species Act, so I think that was one real example we've had recently. Thanks.
Thank you. Stephen?
Yeah, I'd say from a PICES perspective, that this is what really is a strong distinction between PICES and ICES. As Joe was saying, they get specific requests and are funded to do the work and provide specific advice for that question. PICES does not do that. And how we define actionable science as we think about this going forward in the next couple of years, we really need to think about how far down that road we can go, or that we even want to go. So I don't think we have the same kind of examples that ICES does. We have had examples where a member nation has requested specific information, scientific information. For example, a few years ago, I think it was the US requested that PICES do some research and provide a report on the nature of regime shifts in the North Pacific. And PICES set up an expert group and prepared a report and did that at that request. But that wasn't advice driven. It was scientific information. And that's really most of what we're seeing from the PICES side. Yeah.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm just going to make a comment on that topic as well. And it's a bit of a cautionary note that the management styles are very different in each of the PICES member nations. And so if we're having an advisory panel for scientific or management or policy questions, we need to be aware that there needs to be a variety of voices in that audience. And the kinds of products that come out of that kind of a process need to be more generally applicable. And so I just put in your mind that there are other models for international organizations providing science advice. One of them, which you may argue about, is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Now, I would certainly hope PICES doesn't go that whole route of line by line discussion of the wording, but they do produce large and valuable reports on different topics of specific interest. Another one is the kind of planetary boundary concept that Johan Rockström and colleagues have created, that have hit the media a lot, that provide, it's kind of like, what does the word be, indicators in a way we could consider for the North Pacific. So there are other ways to do that. The other side of that is the communication side. Those questions need to be developed, co-designed with the people who we hope going to be interested in this kind of information. Last question is to somebody lucky audience member here from Huva. ICES had a long period where they tried to reorganize the science part of the organization in order to deliver better value to member countries. What were the human and organizational culture obstacles to that change? How were they overcome? And did PICES go where they needed to be? Now, we don't have a lot of time, so why don't I just turn perhaps to Joe, or maybe Joe might deflect and say, did PICES go where it needed to go with that kind of ICES, they're all the same, aren't they? My apologies, ICES, thank you.
this is where I confess I don't have the institutional knowledge. I joined PICES a little over a year ago. In fact, Alan, you've been there 2.5 years and Dave only a matter of months. So, but maybe between the three of us, and Dave has been involved in PICES for many years, so probably knows it from an internal perspective rather than from the SciComm chair perspective.
Okay, one over there.
Yeah, thank you. And that's quite a difficult question because it hasn't been, there wasn't one individual point where we said, let's change, which is what I guess PICES is doing. It was much more an evolution than a revolution. And I think some of the structures changed, some of the ways we did it changed in terms of how you asked for reporting. It was probably 40, 50 years ago, it was a gentleman's club. And I use the word gentleman here specifically because it was all gentlemen. And they used to like sitting and discussing things, and maybe PICES is a wee bit like that now. And it had to sort of evolve from that gentleman's club to start moving towards, I hate the term, actionable science. So it wasn't any one single process. And I think that's what you're starting here is a process, not a step change. It's a gradient you're moving in. So in response to the thing, it has evolved a lot in the 30 years I've been involved in. But it's still the same organization. It's still very bottom-up driven, which I think is a huge value in it. Just in the last 4 months since I've joined, I've had 10 new proposals for innovative working groups in areas that we never looked at before. So that's really, really, really cool. There are a lot of constraints on what we do. We have a rather more rigid approach to advice than I personally think we should. If you look at the Oxford English Dictionary, advice is giving an opinion, emphasize that word, on a problem or issue. And I think I would just advance we shouldn't be scared of giving actionable opinion. So we can say, somebody can come to us and say, what do you think about this? I get that all the time. What do you think about this? You give your opinion and they say, can you substantiate that? And you say, no, but I can do the research to do so.
Thank you, Dave. I'm just going to finish up by asking you to please give a huge round of applause for the panelists. They have all been engaged and really inspiring comments and questions. And just to do that, I'm going to kind of review some of the highlights from my point of view, purely mine, that I have noted as we went through the discussions here, just for you to take away a little bit. And then we're going to move immediately on to the closing ceremony, so don't run away. Some of the comments that I got here were the need to work together. So we're talking here about scientists and policymakers, but I would expand that to communities. We heard, policymakers as one type of community, but there are many other communities as well. We need to work together with communities of all sorts to identify the best way to take care of the ocean. What a nice way to put the kind of the purpose of PICES. We need to talk to people. The place-based knowledge is, I was going to use the word unavoidable, but that's not quite the word. It's essential, I suppose, is what I want there. Another one that I really liked was we need to have a science agency that is neutral or perhaps independent and talks with people throughout the Pacific. If PICES could be an independent broker for scientific information that's targeted to specific problems, particularly where there is a discussion perhaps in the science, it would become an organization that people really look up to. Stephen mentioned the request for information from California. California was being sued, or I guess the US government was being sued because of a collapse of the groundfish fishery, and PICES was able to provide independent scientific information on regime shifts and their impacts on the groundfish stocks. There was a comment made about open ocean protected areas. We didn't really get to the topic of what are the really pertinent or other interesting scientific questions coming up in the next 1 to 2 decades, because that's the time frame that PICES needs to be think about in its redesign. But one of them would be the potential for large open ocean protected areas in some way, and what are the human costs of those? There was the nice discussion of the place for early career ocean professionals, and some suggestions about how to involve them even more into the PICES process. There was a comment that we didn't explore much, but I think is an important one, that whatever group follows on to look at this needs to think about. And that's the roles of, let's call it fundamental or blue sky science versus the kind of applied or actionable science. This came up in some of the other discussions this morning or this week as well. What's PICES? Where does PICES put the balance for those, and how should it be encouraged? I like the most science we do is actionable. It's just not being actioned. And then, of course, that comes to the question of why not? Well, have we co-designed? We need to rethink how we co-design, I suppose, think how we co-design projects to produce actionable science that is actually actioned. You know, and those are kind of distinctions in English, but they are important, and I hope they translate to some of the other languages as well. We need to communicate what we do, and this came up several times, and there's a real question about who does that. Is that a secretariat role? Is that the scientist role? Is it something else? And of course, there's many different audiences that a particular paper could be slightly twigged to or recast to communicate with. And it was noted here in particular that we need to communicate with the politicians, which equals decision makers. Pass over that. I'll just finish up with this question because it kind of started the morning question with this idea of dangerous science. And I would leave you with the question in your mind, in my mind, which I'm now transferring to your mind, about whether it's the science which is dangerous or how that science is communicated. And this gets back to the idea of communication. And you know, what kind of message are we communicating? Are we targeting them towards specific questions? And I suppose if we see a misinterpretation of our science, we need to speak up and correct that to the extent that we can. With that, I'd like to, it's 12 noon. I've been told to have a firm stop at 12 o'clock. I thank you for your attention. And again, I thank the panel, and that we should give ourselves a big round of, oh, I should also just, before you do, my apologies to all of you. I saw hands up for this and that. We just didn't have time. Please communicate any questions and issues or concerns or thoughts to the Secretariat. There's space to talk about the review committee report. All of your thoughts are necessary, and this process is going to go on for a while. Thank you.